What is up, you guys? Diggerdan here, coming at you with another video. Today, I'm doing a review on A Warrior's Path, written by David Ashura. So without further ado, let's dig into it. So normally, this is the point in the video where I would show you the book, but I don't have a physical copy of this book. So here's the picture of the cover instead. I got this book on the Kindle app. I read it on my wife's iPad through the Kindle app. I don't have a physical Kindle. Because David Ashura gave away 13 of his books. I think that's his entire catalog through Kindle. So shout out to David Ashura. You're a real one. But also shout out to Bryce from Shelf Centered. He was the one that posted a video about fantasy news during that timeline. And I just happened to watch it in that timeline when that giveaway fell. So yeah, you should go watch Bryce for all your fantasy news. He's a real one as well. But anyway, I was excited to dig into A Warrior's Path because it's, one, the first book that David Ashura ever wrote, but two, because David Ashura himself, his family's from India, he's Indian, so the caste system that is still prevalent in Indian society plays a huge role in the storytelling of A Warrior's Path, because it's the first book in the four-book series. In the four-book series, the castes and the outcasts. So that's just one blatant example of David Ashura's history and culture kind of bleeding through in his works, and is very prevalent. And that really excited me because I haven't read anything with that really, and because I got 13 new books, right? So if I like him as an author and I like his stuff, then that's a huge score. So yeah, I was really excited to get in and try his stuff. But unfortunately, I overall didn't really like it. The first book, Warrior's Path, unfortunately. But before I get into ratings, some things I did like and some things I was excited about, like I said, is the caste system. But also the magic system is very interesting because it's directly correlated with the caste system. Because depending on what caste you're born into, like the main character, Rukh, however you want to say it, it's R-U-K-H. I said Rukh or Rukh. Rukh. I said Rukh. Like the main character, Rukh, he's born a Kuma, who is like the warrior clan or the warrior class or caste. And so their whole thing is defending the cities from the Chimera, from the monsters. Because this is also sort of post-apocalyptic, I guess you could say. Because this was... I feel like it was inspired, I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like it was inspired from Attack on Titan, because the city structure is very, very similar to Attack on Titan, where there's these cities that are the only things that are safe, and then everything else outside of the city is war zone, no man's land. You go out there, you're going to be eaten by monsters, right? So that's how it is in Attack on Titan. You're going to get attacked by titans, hence the name. But with A Warrior's Path in the series, the Caste and Outcasts, you go outside these cities, and then you have these chimeras, which are just going to tear you to shreds. And the chimeras are interesting because they are literally bred from the evil one. She is a terrible person, or thing. She's not even really a person anymore. And yeah, the breed like animals, like random animals together. So like one that really stuck out to me, like really the most out there, is elephants and baboons. Literally got bred together somehow, and now they're stomping around the world killing humans. It's just weird, wild things like that. Was kind of fun and interesting because instead of just like your basic orcs or your basic bad evil men, it's monsters, which I think is more fun. Personally, but a lot of times it depends on setting, things like that. But I think the chimeras, help this story quite a bit, and help the setting, and make it feel more fantastical and otherworldly, right? So yeah. Anyway, those are some things I did like. Some things I didn't like before I get into specifics is just kind of the character structure in general. A lot of the characters I did not like. The plot itself was kind of mid. In like the dialogue and prose, I did not really care for. There were a lot of things that got repeated many, many times, even from the same character's point of view. And I feel like, I don't think David Ashura did this on purpose, but when I was reading it, I was feeling as if he thought I was stupid as a reader, and I needed a clarification every other page, even though I know exactly what's going on because the characters are saying their thoughts. I don't know. That's a bad explanation, but I just felt like I was being dumbed down. Everything was being dumbed down, being explained 5, 6 times. Even if from different characters' perspectives, it was the exact same thing that was being said. So it's not like a character saw the scenario from a different perspective and then brought a new light to it. Because that's good. That happens all the time in literature, and it makes it interesting. It's like, oh, okay. That's like one of the huge things I love about Wheel of Time, is that one event can happen, and the multiple characters see that event through different eyes, and they bring different perspectives, and then it kind of can tie this whole cohesive story together. Where this one, it's one event happens, all these characters are saying the exact same thing. It's like, okay, I get it. That thing happened. Let's move on. This is what we're doing. So that kind of bored me very quickly. So yeah. But overall, like I said, I wanted to like this book, but unfortunately I did not. With that being said, my overall score out of 10 was a 4.79. Now, if you're asking yourself, Daniel, how the heck do you get a random 4.79 out of 10? Well, there's 5 categories I rate, and I rate each category 1 through 10, and then I take an average of those 5 ratings to get my overall score. So if you don't want any spoilers, I would click off now. If you're still excited to read it, go do it. If you got them for free, especially. But yeah, again, shout out to you, David Ashura. You're cool. I've never met you. I'd love to have a conversation with you. You seem cool. I've seen interviews. But yeah, just the first book. Maybe I'll give another book a try. Maybe, because I know this was your first book, so I get that. But yeah, I don't know. Anyway, let's dig into spoilers. So first category I like to rate is emotional impact, and I rated emotional impact as a 3.85 out of 10. Now, the reason it's so low, this isn't even the lowest thing I have, unfortunately, is because, like I said, I got bored very quickly. Like the opening was really interesting, where it was Rukh, the main character. He was basically thrown in the wild. Like, he's on his first, not expedition, but his first trial, I think is what it's called, defending a caravan heading to another city from the Crimeans. But then it jumps into, there's, like, the scouts come back and give a report saying that there's multiple bands of Chimeras out there, like multiple armies. And I think it was, I can't remember, because it's been a few weeks since I read this book. But I think that caravan was only like a couple hundred soldiers. I want to say it was like 300 soldiers, or men, like fighting men. And then they were up against like a couple thousand Chimera. I think there was like 10-1, I think is what it was. So it's like, okay, shoot, just get thrown in this. So it was kind of cool thrown into it. And the world building was cool, but there were just so many things, like the world stopped. Like the story stopped, so world building could be explained upon. And I think part of that is because it's the first book in a series. And I get that. There's a lot of groundwork the author's trying to lay to have payoff later and for things to make sense. And so the story can move along, and it makes sense. In like the magic system, because there's a lot of action that happens, and the magic gets pulled all the time. So I understand why it occurs, but I think the way it went was not good, in my opinion. I think it was very exposition heavy, and not many things were happening all the time. And when things were happening, it was good. It was great. It was exciting to move on. But for the most part, things weren't happening, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I was just bored a lot. And like I said already, like characters repeating the situation a lot of times, and that's not even with world building. So things just constantly are getting slowed down. And towards the end, it does pick up quite a bit. But it's because I think he ran out of things to talk slow about. So he's like, oh, shoot, I got to wrap this story up. So things finally started happening, it felt like. So that was, yeah. And like I said, by the time things started happening, I was losing interest. And yeah, so 3.85 for emotional impact. Next is characters. I rated this as just an even 5. There were a lot of characters I did like Rukh. He was solid. His dad, I really enjoyed. Like, he was solid. He was basically like the clan chief or the caste chief. I forget the actual name, but he was the head of the Shektan family, is what it is, because it's Rukh Shektan. Yeah. So, and another thing, speaking of his dad, his parents, when they started talking, maybe it's a culture thing. I'm not sure. But when it started talking about his dad and it never said his dad and it just had the title, I was really confused. I forget what this title even is now, but I think it was like or not Kuma. It was like L. It was like El Id. I think is what something like that. I was really confused. And then like halfway through the book, his sister is finally like, "Oh yeah, our El," I finally clicked that it's like, okay, he's the head of the household, head of the family. That's why he has that title, if that makes sense. And then his sister I actually didn't like as a character. She seemed too uppity. Whatever. I guess it makes sense because she's from that caste where they tend to look down on the other castes. I get it, but his parents were kind of very progressive or forward thinking by taking in like his brother, for example, even though he's not of the Kuma caste. But then his sister is okay with they're both younger brother. But then when this, I forget her name. I'm terrible with names. I'm sorry. Jessura. That's her name. Jessura. She is Greena. She's basically an abomination where she is a child of parents who are from different castes, which in the cities is a big no-no. But she's an outcast, and he finds her in the wilderness. Anyway, towards the end, when she's in the city, after Rukh like deposits her or whatever, tries to save her life, and then she's hanging out with Rukh's family. Rukh's family's fine with her for the most part, aside from her sister, which I guess her brother even a little bit. And I don't know, I didn't like it. And the villains, not really that great, you know? The villains are probably the weakest part. And the whole underground, like, evil, basically, like, the Dark One's servants, were a little interesting, kind of exploring that network a little bit, were interesting. But the characters themselves, like, Rukh's father's rival, again, I don't remember his name, forgettable, I didn't like. And it was kind of like set up a little bit where his public name is announced and they have their beef, whatever, but then you can kind of tell it's him as the head of like the Dark One's servants, and it's not revealed until the last couple chapters, but it's like first couple chapters when that head of the Dark One's servants was revealed, it's like, okay, who is it? Who could it possibly be? But then after he gets introduced reintroduced in later chapters, it's like, oh, okay, it's Rukh's dad's rival. Okay, that makes sense. But then it's like, oh, it's a mic drop at the towards the end. I'm like, we already knew. Like, don't treat me like I'm dumb, you know? I don't know. Maybe he could have hit it better, or maybe he should have done the reveal sooner. I don't know, but that didn't really work well with me. That's another reason, going back to emotional impact, why that was so low. Because things like that would happen, where it's like, oh, it's a mic drop. This is really interesting. Big blow up of the story. But then it's like, come on, we called that like 100 pages ago. So anyway. Next, I like to rate plot. I rated plot as a 4.5 out of 10. I overall didn't like the plot. It didn't seem like a crazy amount happened. But I think what did happen, I didn't care for. But I didn't really care for except when Rukh was out in the wilderness doing his thing. Especially towards the end when he went to the breeding grounds for the Chimera, but he was like, he got lost from his troop, his squad, whatever it's called, and he was just kind of doing things on his own. That was probably the highlight of the book for me. Just him going out, being a badass MFer, and just laying waste to these Chimera by himself. And then when he finally gets meets up with the squad. They're like, oh my god, we were trying to follow you, catch back up, and you just laid waste, and there's just so many crime here, you know? So it's like that was probably the highlight of the book. And I think it's because it was so action-packed and things were actually happening, and the world didn't stop to like monologue at me and explain the world, you know? So I did like that. But again, like there wasn't too much plot, if that makes sense. Like I don't want to sound pretentious or anything, but that's like a lot of things didn't really happen, you know? A lot of things got explained at a lot. Like there was a sequence in the city where Rukh's brother and sister are in a library for weeks at a time trying to track down any research about the withering knife. But they're trying to be secretive about it. Well, actually, it's his brother and then his brother's like girlfriend from a different caste, but they can't say they're dating because of the whole caste system, blah, 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 blah. Which was an interesting kind of bringing that introduction, like, oh, the kind of the romance thing. That was cool. But the fact that they're literally sitting in a library in dusty basement and it's just the two of them for weeks, months at a time, and nothing is really happening. It's like, all right, can we move on? Like we get the withering knife. But then it's like, also, why did his dad have to tell him, oh, go research the withering knife, when he basically already said, oh yeah, the withering knife does this, this, and this? It's like, if you already know everything about it, why do you need to do months and months of research on it? That doesn't make sense to me. There were a lot of things like that would happen where it's like a character is like, oh, we need to go do this. And it was like, in the explanation, it's like, you already know the info. Like, what are we doing? Anyway, that's why I didn't like the plot. I think there were cool elements, like the Tyagons, I think is how you say it. Basically, the tiger chimera were actually good guys, and they were doing everything in their power. They were like the leaders of the chimera, and they were doing everything in their power to... Actually, no, it wasn't the Tyagons. Those were the ones that were leaders of the chimera before, like the bull men. I forget their name. The bull men were made, and then the bull men were the heads of the squads, and they were doing everything in their power to actually destroy the chimera, even at the cost of their own life, because they were trained by this human hero that's like a god to a lot of the caste people. So yeah, that person like taught the Bales, I think is how you say it, the Bales like honor and glory, and it's like, you can think for yourself, so we're brothers. So I think that was kind of cool. But I think like the flip-flop, as soon as those characters were introduced and like Rukh was starting to gain trust with them, they immediately were like ended. They were immediately dead. It's like, come on. You want things to happen, but then you do things like that immediately take a step back. It's like one step forward, two steps back. I don't know. So plot, mid, 4.5. Next is dialogue and prose at a 3.5. This was easily the lowest thing that I rated. Like I said, I just got bored a lot. There was a lot of like just slow expositions or slow dialogue that I didn't care for. And there were things that kind of made things confusing. Like there were, I forget exactly the example, but I think when Rukh was towards the end, when he was in the like the breeding grounds, there was a couple scenes where I'm like, I thought he was with somebody right now. Like, how is he by himself? Like, there was just things that were a little unclear that I was confused. And a huge sin that I do not like is when there's blocks of dialogue or lines of dialogue and you lose track of who's who, because there's just the quotes and there's not quote said Rukh or whatever. So that's a sin. And that happened a couple times in this book, and I did not like that. Another thing, like I said, there's just characters repeating things all the time. Like, or even in his own thoughts. It's like, oh, we gotta do this because if we don't, we're gonna die and it's gonna be the end of the world. Oh, we gotta go do this because if we don't, we're gonna die and it's gonna be the end of the world. If we go do this, you know, so it's like, I get it. Pump the brakes on that. Just let it happen. Cut a couple lines. Let's make things happen, you know? So I fell asleep reading this book a couple times, and I almost DNF'd it 3 or 4 different times. But I'm like, no, I'm gonna give it its real. I'm gonna complete it. I'm gonna give it its shot. It's on Kindle. I can read this whenever I want. I can literally read it in bed. Or just read it a couple pages at a time. Let's do it. But yeah, the dialogue in prose really killed me. Yeah, and I think the story could have been better if just things were cut out. But I think the author just wanted to explain as much as he could, so the reader understood as much as they could. And I respect that and I get that. But then just make the book longer, you know? Like, I know that's counterintuitive to what I'm saying, but then it's like, make the book longer, that way you can have better pacing instead of just big chunk of explanation and then tiny chunk of plot. If you make the book longer, you can have plot throughout the explanation, if that makes sense. You can almost have the plot be the explanation instead of just, oh, let's stop, and this is how the caste system works. This is how the magic system works. This is how, whatever. To each his own. Again, first book, I can't be too hard on them, but I did not like the dialogue and prose. Last thing I'm going to rate is the world building. This is something I actually did enjoy. So good job, David. This was a 7.1. And something that I did really enjoy, honestly, is the magic system. With the different castes having the different types of talents, I think is how it's explained. Like, again, the Kumas being warrior class. They can do their duos, trios, quads. I forget the other names, but you have like the doctor caste where they are there to fix people and mend them, physicians. There's like the laborer caste, which is just typical lowest class, whatever, where they do the fields. They're got green thumbs. There's another one where it's like their whole thing is kind of like commerce and like bookkeeping, and there's another one that their whole thing is like politicking. Actually like leadership, so merchants, so there's a lot of different castes, which is cool, and they all have different little talents, little magics. And it was cool when Rukh started getting other talents, like when he could heal or when he could like hide. Like, it was cool. And I get that it's like, oh, he's an outcast because he's an abomination, whatever. I know, slowly tearing those prejudices down a little bit, and I am actually excited to find out what happens later and see if the societal norms change. That'd be cool. And that's something that made me keep reading because I was excited to see what happened next with the world building, which I know I complained a lot about, like, oh, he stopped and talked about world building. That's all I did. Well, if you're going to do that, your world building better be phenomenal, So honestly, I probably should have knocked world building a little lower than I did because of, oh, let's stop the world to explain stuff. But honestly, what I was given, I was really happy with as far as world building goes. Different type of magic that I haven't seen before, which I think is really cool. You can almost have like interbreeding with magic, which is cool. Yeah, and then like I said, the cities themselves kind of being these like little oases of safety. And then like the cities literally being set up just like in Attack on Titan, where it's like you have the outer wall where it's really, oh, it's just going to slow them down if they actually make an attack. And then you have like the inner wall, but it's still hundreds of square miles, so it's really cool, those aspects. So I know a lot of negativity, but if you got these for free, or if you've even bought them, whatever, and you want to give David Ashura a try, I hesitantly would say do it. But maybe don't start with his first book. Maybe start with one of his different series. And maybe I'm doing too harsh. I'm sorry. That's just how I feel. So anyway, that's it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like down below. If you want to see more from me, Diggerdan, please hit that subscribe button, as well as that bell notification icon so you guys know when I upload each and every single time. And yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys thought about this book, or David Ashura, or if you got anything from his giveaway, or just anything like that. So thank you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.